Final Fantasy has over a dozen completely different magic systems, and most of them have nothing to do with each other, from spells that literally manipulate time, to magic you can only learn by getting hit in the face by a monster, to an entire school of forbidden spells that almost nobody ever unlocks. Today I'm breaking down every single magic type in the series and what makes each one unique, starting with the one everyone underestimates: white magic. White magic is the first thing Final Fantasy ever teaches you, and that's exactly why nobody respects it. It shows up in the original game back in 1987 as your basic healing toolkit. Cure, Cura, Curaga, 3 tiers of Please Don't Die, scaling with your spirit stat and costing barely any MP. It's training wheels. It's the thing you spam while your black mage does the real work. But here's the thing, white magic has a body count. Holy, the signature white magic damage spell first appears in Final Fantasy IV, and it hits undead enemies harder than almost anything a black mage can throw. The gentlest magic type in the entire series doubles as the single most lethal force against an entire category of enemies. One hand heals your party, the other obliterates anything that's already dead. And it kept growing. By Final Fantasy V, Asuna gave it full status removal on top of healing and resurrection. White magic quietly became the most complete support system in the game, without anyone updating its reputation. White mages were exclusively female characters through the early entries, which cemented a very specific image: the healer in the back row. The boring one. But white magic was always more than that. It just took the community decades to stop arguing about it. But if white magic is the light, then the next magic type is the thing that makes the darkness hit back. Black magic, if white magic is the safety net, black magic is the reason you need one. Launching alongside its counterpart in the original Final Fantasy, black magic exists for one purpose: destruction. And it does that job through 3 elemental pillars that have barely changed in almost 4 decades: fire, blizzard, and thunder. These 3 spells are the foundation of every offensive magic system in the series. But here's where it gets interesting. The same fire spell that melts an ice-type enemy into nothing, completely useless against a fire-immune one, 0 damage. That single mechanic forces you to think about every encounter differently, maintaining an entire elemental arsenal and reading enemy weaknesses on the fly. One spell can carry a fight or throw it entirely. The naming system is equally iconic. Starting with Final Fantasy IV, Tier 2 spells gain the Dashra suffix, so fire becomes Fira, blizzard becomes Blizzara, thunder becomes Thundara. Tier 3 adds Gay Faraga, Blizzaga, Thundaga. It's one of the most consistent systems in the entire franchise, and it's how you know exactly how much pain you're about to dish out. But raw elemental damage is just the starting point. Endgame black mages unlock Meteor for devastating non-elemental damage, and Flare as the nuclear option that ignores resistances entirely. These spells turn a glass cannon into a walking apocalypse, and that glass cannon reputation is earned. Black mages hit harder than anyone in most early Final Fantasy games, but they fold the second something touches them. Final Fantasy XIV took this even further by punishing you for moving while casting, which the community has lovingly described as either brilliant design or developer cruelty, but at least black mages commit to a lane. The next magic type on this list tried to do everything at once and paid the price for it. Red magic. Every magic type we've covered so far is defined by what it does. Red magic is defined by what it can't. When Final Fantasy III introduced the Red Mage in 1990, it looked like the ultimate cheat code. You could cast Cure and Fire, you could swing a sword and wear armor, you had healing, damage, fun, and physical combat all in one job. But here's where it gets interesting, because the developers built a ceiling into the system on purpose. Red magic caps at Tier 2 spells. No Firaga, no Kuraga, no access to the most powerful versions of anything. You get Fire and Fira, Cure and Cura, and that's it. The GA variants are permanently locked out, and that's not a balancing oversight. That's the entire point. The design philosophy is brutally simple. Flexibility costs power. Red mages trade raw ceiling for the ability to do everything at once. In a game built around specialized jobs, they're the deliberate compromise. The one class that refuses to commit. But the series gave red mages something to compensate. Dual cast, the ability to fire 2 spells in a single turn. First appeared in Final Fantasy XI and became the job's defining mechanic through Final Fantasy V, 11, and 14. You can't cast Firaga, but you can cast Fira twice before the Black Mage finishes one spell, and that trade-off creates a genuine split in the community. Newer players look at Red Mages and see a class that's worse at everything. Speedrunners and veteran players see something completely different. Dual cast plus hybrid utility means fewer job switches, fewer wasted turns, and faster clears in encounters where versatility matters more than raw power. The red mage isn't weak, it's deliberately constrained, and that constraint tells you everything about how Final Fantasy thinks about class balance. But if you think a hard cap on spell tiers is a weird design choice, wait until you see a magic system where you have to get hit by an enemy attack just to learn it. Blue magic. Every other magic type in Final Fantasy follows the same basic loop. Level up, unlock spell, cast spell. Blue magic throws that entire system in the trash. To learn blue magic, you have to get hit by it, on purpose. You walk up to an enemy, pray it uses its most dangerous ability, take the hit to the face, survive, and if the game feels generous, the spell is yours. This is the system that debuted in Final Fantasy V back in 1992, and it immediately created a completely different kind of player. Here's the thing though, it's not just about tanking one hit and moving on. The learning mechanic turns every encounter into a puzzle. You need to find the specific enemy that casts the spell you want. You need to keep that enemy alive long enough for it to actually use the ability, which sometimes means deliberately not killing it while it's trying to kill you. Then you need to survive the attack. Then you need the game to actually register the learn. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you do the whole song and dance 3, 4, 5 times before it sticks. But the payoff is absurd. Final Fantasy V alone has over 25 blue magic spells, and many of them are completely unavailable through any other job. Mighty Guard slaps multiple defensive buffs on your entire party in a single cast. Self-destruct does exactly what it sounds like. Vampire heals you for the damage you deal. Death just kills things outright. These aren't novelty tricks, they're some of the most powerful tools in the game. Auto locked behind a system that rewards obsession, and the series never quite figured out what to do with it long term. Final Fantasy XIV added Blue Mage in 2019, but permanently capped it at level 80 and locked it out of Savage Raids entirely. The developers explicitly refused to make it a full job. The community wanted it. The answer was no. Blue magic was too weird, too unpredictable, too hard to balance alongside everything else, which honestly just proves the point. Blue magic was never designed to play nice with the rest of the system. It was designed to reward the players willing to stand in fire and learn from it. Speaking of magic that bends the rules of the game itself, the next type doesn't just manipulate damage or healing, it manipulates time. Time magic. Every magic type we've covered so far plays by the rules. You cast a spell on something takes damage, something gets healed, somebody learns a new trick. Time magic doesn't care about any of that. Time magic changes the rules themselves. It debuts in Final Fantasy III in 1990 with 2 spells that immediately tell you this is a different beast. Haste increases your action speed. Slow decreases the enemies. Neither one touches an HP bar. Neither one deals damage. But together, they warp the entire structure of a fight, because in a turn-based system, controlling who acts and how often is controlling everything. Here's the thing, haste isn't just a nice buff, it multiplies your turn rate by roughly 1.5 times depending on the game's engine, which means your party is acting 3 times for every 2 enemy turns. That's not a convenience. That's a mathematical stranglehold on the encounter, but the real chaos starts with stop, which first shows up in Final Fantasy IV in 1991. Stop doesn't slow enemies down, it freezes them completely for 1 to 3 turns. The enemy just stands there while you dismantle them. No counterattack, no response, nothing. And then Final Fantasy VIII takes the whole concept sideways. The junction system lets you attach time magic spells directly to your character stats, turning haste and slow into permanent passive bonuses you draw from enemies. You're not even casting these spells anymore. You're wearing them, but the spell that breaks everything is Quicken, which shows up in Final Fantasy IX. It grants an extra turn. In a turn-based system, acting twice before the game can respond isn't a buff. It's a structural violation. Developers have to actively design around spells like this, restricting availability or building counters specifically to prevent time magic from collapsing their encounter design. The competitive community agrees. Haste is universally considered mandatory for difficult bosses. Stop is outright banned in some community challenge rule sets. Critics say time magic solves fights through stat multiplication rather than strategy, but knowing which spells to stack, when to cast them, and how to sequence your turns around accelerated timelines, that is the strategy. A magic type so powerful the game has to defend against itself, but if you think manipulating time sounds unfair, wait until you see what green magic does to status effects. Green Magic. Green Magic is the magic type that even Final Fantasy fans forget exists. It debuted in Final Fantasy V back in 1992, tied to the Ranger job, and it occupied this weird middle ground between Black Magic's raw damage and White Magic's healing. Instead of committing fully to either side, Green Magic focused on something different entirely, making your enemies worse at fighting you. But here's the thing, that concept is way more interesting than it sounds. Poison ticks chipping away at health bars. Paralysis locking enemies out of their turns completely. Confusion turning a powerful boss's own attacks against itself. Green Magic wasn't about winning fights through brute force or outlasting them with heals. It was about degrading enemy capability over time until the battle tipped in your favor. Think of it as the slow, patient Predator approach to combat, and in a series dominated by flashy explosions and massive cure spells, that made it an oddity from day one. But here's where it gets complicated. After Final Fantasy V, Green Magic essentially vanished as a formal classification. Later games didn't kill its ideas, they just absorbed them into other systems without giving Green Magic any credit. Final Fantasy IX's Geomancy borrowed its nature-focused environmental DNA. Final Fantasy XIII's Commando Paradigm folded similar status degradation mechanics into its framework. The spell survived, but the label didn't. The result is genuinely kind of sad. Green Magic has virtually no dedicated fan base. Community discussions skip right past it. Some players argue Geomancy quietly replaced it in the modern era, though nothing official confirms that. It's the experimental magic type that never found its footing. E-era design concept that worked on paper but got cannibalized by systems that did individual pieces of it better. But if Green Magic feels like the forgotten middle child of the series, the next type is its polar opposite, a magic classification so iconic it shaped the identity of entire games. Holy Magic. Up to this point, every magic type we've covered earns its place through what it does mechanically. Holy Magic earns its place through what it means, and honestly, that's both its greatest strength and its biggest weakness. Holy Magic emerges as its own classification in Final Fantasy III, tied to light elemental damage and anchored to the Paladin job, a class that first appeared all the way back in Final Fantasy I, with both holy spells and healing abilities bundled together. The signature spell, Holy, deals massive light elemental damage and has historically been locked behind the most powerful jobs or saved as a late game unlock. You don't stumble into Holy, you earn it. But here's where it gets interesting. If you strip away the lore, Holy Magic and White Magic are doing a lot of the same things. Both deal light elemental damage through the Holy spell. Both live in healing adjacent jobs. In several games, the only real distinction between them is narrative. Light versus darkness, purity versus corruption. Mechanically, they're twins wearing different outfits. So why does Holy Magic deserve its own category? Final Fantasy Tactics answers that question better than any other game in the series. In Tactics, Holy spells scale with the Faith stat. Higher faith means your holy spells hit harder, your healing is more potent, your entire magical identity becomes more powerful. But faith cuts both ways. The more faith your character has, the more damage they take from all incoming magic. Your conviction makes you stronger and more fragile at the same time. That's not just a stat, that's a philosophy encoded into a number. Religious devotion as a literal gameplay trade-off where belief is power, but power costs you everything. And that's the honest answer to the redundancy criticism. Holy Magic's mechanical identity is thin compared to something like Time Magic or Blue Magic, but Final Fantasy is a series built on narrative weight, and Holy Magic carries more symbolic meaning than any other type in the franchise. It's the only magic system where the lore isn't decorating the mechanics, or the lore is the mechanic. But if Holy Magic blurs the line between mechanics and meaning, the next type blurs the line between magic and something else entirely. Summoning, Evocation. Every magic type we've covered so far does something to the battlefield. Summoning does something fundamentally different. It puts something on the battlefield, and that distinction changes everything about how this system works. Summoning debuts in Final Fantasy III in 1990, and right out of the gate, it establishes the template. You spend a massive chunk of MP. You call a name creature, Salamander, Titan, Sildra, and that creature shows up to deal elemental or multi-target damage on a scale nothing else in your arsenal can match. But here's what separates this from just casting a bigger fire spell. These aren't spell effects with creature animations slapped on top. These are named entities. They have histories. They have personalities. They have elemental identities that stay consistent across decades of games. And the roster gets enormous. Ifrit becomes the fire summon. Ramo handles lightning. Leviathan owns water. Alexander is a literal holy fortress. Neo Bahamut and Kujata join the lineup as the series expands, each one carrying individual lore that fans obsess over to this day. You're not selecting from a spell menu anymore. You're choosing which ancient being owes you a favor, but here's where the power scaling gets absurd. Knights of Round in Final Fantasy VII hits the target 15 consecutive times, each hit dealing 9,999 damage, which is the maximum the game allows per hit. It costs 250 MP to cast, and it is widely considered the single most visually excessive summon in the entire franchise. It also completely demolishes endgame difficulty because nothing in the game is designed to survive that kind of output. Then Final Fantasy X takes the whole concept and tears it apart. Aeons, the game's version of summons, don't just show up, deal damage, and leave. They enter the battlefield and replace your party. They absorb hits meant for your characters. You can heal them, strengthen them throughout the entire game, and if you mismanage them, they can be permanently wounded. They're not spells, they're party members with their own health bars and combat options. That's what makes summoning categorically different from everything else on this list. It's the only magic type that produces semi-autonomous allies with independent behavior. But the line between casting a spell and deploying a combatant genuinely blurs. Speedrunning communities despise the long animation sequences because they waste precious seconds. Narrative-focused players consider those same animations half the appeal, but if summoning blurs the line between magic and combat, the next type on our list doesn't even acknowledge the line exists: arcane magic. Here's the thing about arcane magic, it's not really a magic system, it's what happens when a spell doesn't belong anywhere else. Black magic handles elemental damage, white magic handles healing, time magic handles speed and temporal manipulation, summoning calls in the big guns. But what do you do with a spell that does a little bit of everything and fits none of those boxes? You call it arcane and move on. Final Fantasy XII is the only game that actually committed to this idea. Arcane magic sits on the license board as its own category, costing anywhere from 40 to 55 MP per cast, and the spell list reads like a junk drawer of magical leftovers. Scathe deals massive non-elemental damage. Silence shuts down enemy casters. Teleport literally removes you from the battlefield. There's no unifying mechanic, no shared element, no consistent scaling formula. The only thing these spells have in common is that they didn't fit anywhere else. But here's where it gets interesting. Final Fantasy XIV took the word arcane and built an entirely different concept around it. The Arcanist class uses geometric sigil magic, drawing power from calculated patterns rather than raw elemental force. That class then splits into Scholar and Summoner, one focused on shielding and support, the other on summoning damage. The lore has zero overlap with Final Fantasy XII's version. Same word, completely different magic, and that contradiction is actually the most honest thing about arcane magic as a category. It has no consistent MP to damage ratio across games. It requires high intelligence or magic stats to use effectively, but so does everything else at that tier. A meaningful portion of players don't even recognize it as a distinct magic type, and they're not wrong to feel that way. Arcane magic is a filing cabinet for spells that broke the taxonomy, but if you want to see a spell type that broke something far more important, like game balance itself, wait until you hear about Gravity Magic. Gravity Magic. Gravity doesn't care how strong you are. It doesn't care about your armor, your magic defense, or how many buffs you've stacked. It cares about one thing, how much HP you have, and then it takes half of it. Gravity Magic debuts in Final Fantasy IV in 1991 with 2 spells. Gravity cuts the target's current HP by 50%. Graviga cuts it by 75%. Those aren't flat damage numbers, they're percentage reductions of whatever the enemy's health pool actually is, which means a trash mob with 1000 HP and a super boss with 1 million HP both lose the same proportion of their life in a single cast. But here's where the math gets dangerous. Because gravity scales with the target's max HP and ignores all defensive stats, it is structurally one of the most overpowered mechanics in the entire series. Standard magic defense? Irrelevant. Armor? Doesn't apply. Elemental resistance? Gravity isn't an element. It exists outside the normal damage framework entirely, and that makes it a nightmare for game balance. The developers knew this. Kefka uses gravity repeatedly in Final Fantasy VI, and the way the game frames it tells you everything. This isn't treated like casting fire or Blizzard. It's presented as reality-bending magic, something that warps the rules of the world itself. Therefore, when the most iconic villain in the series reaches for a spell to demonstrate his power, he reaches for gravity. That's not an accident, but the design problem is obvious. A spell that bypasses all counterplay and scales infinitely with enemy health pools breaks encounters wide open. The typical developer solution? Just make bosses immune to it. which is itself an admission that the math is broken. You don't need to give a boss immunity to fire, because fire has natural limits. Gravity doesn't. Speedrunning and challenge run communities have been arguing about this for years. Some treat gravity as legitimate strategy, a tool the game gives you that you'd be foolish not to use. Others ban it outright from challenge rule sets because a spell with zero counterplay isn't strategy, it's an exploit that happened to ship. The debate has never been settled, and it probably never will be. But if you think percentage-based HP removal is chaotic, wait until you see a magic system where the battlefield itself decides what spell you cast. Geomancy, every magic type up to this point has one thing in common. You pick the spell. You choose fire, you choose cure, you choose haste. Boy, the game responds to your decision. Geomancy throws that entire contract in the trash. When the Geomancer job debuts in Final Fantasy V in 1992, it introduces a system where the terrain picks the spell for you. You're standing on lava. The game fires off a fire-type attack, frozen tundra, ice spell, underwater battlefield, water effect. The player presses the ability button and the environment decides what happens next. You are not the caster. You are the trigger, but here's where it gets genuinely weird. The Geomancer has access to over 64 terrain-based spells, and the specific one that activates is random within the terrain's pool. So even if you know you're standing on a fire tile, you don't know which fire spell you're getting. It could be a weak burn, it could be a devastating eruption. Oh, the system has built-in procedural unpredictability, and that's not a bug, that's the entire design. The trade-off is that Geomancy costs 0 MP, nothing. You can spam it endlessly without ever worrying about resource management, but you surrender the one thing every other Magic user takes for granted: control over your own output. This creates a fascinating split in the community. Final Fantasy V veterans treat the Geomancer as a puzzle job. You study the terrain, position yourself on the right tiles, and play the odds. It rewards environmental awareness and advanced planning in ways no other job demands. Speedrunners, on the other hand, treat it as a complete liability. You cannot optimize randomness. You cannot route around a system that refuses to give you consistent results. Both camps are absolutely right within their own frameworks. Final Fantasy IX in 2000 tried to revisit the concept through Eiko's exclusive abilities, tying elemental summons to terrain effects, but it stripped out the randomness entirely, which split the community further. Is Geomancy defined by its environmental logic or by its chaos? The series never settled that question, and honestly, Geomancy's strangeness is part of what makes it memorable, but it's still a system with rules, even if those rules fight the player. The next magic type has no rules at all because it was never meant to exist. Forbidden Magic. In Final Fantasy II, released in 1988, the most powerful spell in the game requires 6 of your allies to die before you can cast it, not fall in battle and get revived. Die permanently. Half your party gone as the price of admission for a single spell. That's Ultima, and that introduction tells you everything you need to know about how Final Fantasy treats forbidden magic. But here's the thing, Ultima's reputation doesn't come from raw damage. On paper, it looks competitive. In Final Fantasy VII, Ultima deals 9,999 damage per cast at 250 MP, which matches Knights of Rounds per hit cap at the same MP cost. In Final Fantasy XII, it's the final magic license on the entire grid. Every single prerequisite spell must be unlocked before Ultima even becomes available, and then it costs 99 MP every time you press the button, so the unlock cost is enormous. But the payoff, other spells in the series match or exceed Ultima's numbers in specific contexts. Knights of Round hits 15 times. Gravity spells scale infinitely with enemy HP. Flare ignores elemental resistance. Mechanically, Ultima is not always the strongest option in the room, and that's exactly why it works. Ultima's real power is narrative authority. Final Fantasy XIV makes this explicit. In A Realm Reborn, Ultima is the signature spell of the Astral Calamity lore event, classified as forbidden primal magic. Not forbidden because it deals too much damage. Forbidden because its existence destabilizes the world's metaphysical structure. Using it doesn't just kill enemies, it warps reality around the caster. The community has debated Ultima's balance in nearly every game it appears in. Some players call it underwhelming given the insane unlock requirements. Others argue the difficulty of access is the correct penalty for a spell that the lore treats as reality threatening. And for decades, urban legends have circulated about secret Ultima mechanics, hidden effects that unlock additional power. They get debunked every single time, but that might be the most revealing thing about the spell. Players keep believing Ultima should do more than it does, because the world building insists it can. Every magic type in this video follows a logic. White magic heals, black magic burns, time magic bends speed, gravity magic breaks defenses, geomancy removes your control entirely. Ultima's logic is different. It exists to mark the outer boundary of what magic is allowed to be in the Final Fantasy universe, and every single entry in the series decides for itself where exactly that boundary sits. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.